A man clutches a shimmering lump of earth, surrounded by silence. The village once filled with laughter now lies abandoned, buried in dust and ghosts. He whispers the names of those lost, but as he drops the piece, it cracks, revealing a dark, living creature within the stone. The story begins with a curse that should have remained buried. The valley of Kuruma was never quiet. Even in drought, even in hunger, the wind carried whispers of ancestors, of forgotten prayers, of things the earth tried to say, but men refused to hear. For generations, the people of Kuruma survived between dust and devotion. Their fields cracked under a merciless sun. Their children coughed through the night. Yet they rose each dawn, believing the earth still loved them. They spoke of her like a mother who punished harshly, but never stopped caring. But mothers grow tired, and the earth had grown very, very tired. Tariq had once been a man of laughter, before the drought, before the debts, before his name became a sigh on his wife's lips. He had hands that could coax life out of dying soil. But lately, even his touch had turned barren. Every seed he planted seemed to vanish into a throat of dust. At dawn, he would walk the fields barefoot, feeling the heat that came too early, the lifeless texture of the ground. His children would follow, tracing his footsteps in silence, pretending they were explorers instead of beggars. The youngest, Sami, would always ask the same question. "When will the earth wake up again, Baba?" And Tariq would force a smile, hiding the weight in his chest. "Soon," he'd whisper, "when she forgives us." But forgiveness had a price, and no one knew what they owed. The drought stretched into years. The wells sank lower, and the elders began selling their tools for food. Nights grew crueler, not from cold, but from hopelessness. Tariq watched men leave the valley, seeking work in distant towns, their shadows lengthening across the horizon like the last ropes of faith snapping one by one. He wanted to leave too, but Sofa, his wife, believed leaving would anger the spirits. "This land remembers us," she said softly one night as she mended his torn shirt. "If we leave her now, she will never forgive our names." Her voice carried the kind of calm only faith can create, and only grief can destroy. The first rumor arrived like smoke on the wind. Something small, almost unbelievable. A stranger had found traces of gold in the river beyond the western hills. Not the gold of kings or cities, but raw, coarse dust, hiding between pebbles like tiny suns. The men of the valley laughed at first. Gold was a story for other places, for luckier lands. But hunger erases doubt, and then the stranger himself appeared. His name was Jonas, tall, liane, with a face carved by travel and loss. He came with tools strapped to his back and a small pouch tied to his belt. When he opened it before the elders, the air itself seemed to shift. Inside lay the proof, gold dust, gleaming faintly in the torchlight. The men stared as if they had seen a miracle. The women whispered prayers. Only the oldest among them, Elder Rahim, turned away. "Not all that shines is meant for our hands," he said. "The earth buries her pain for a reason." But no one listened. Hunger speaks louder than wisdom. Tariq watched Jonas that night from the edge of the gathering fire. Something in the man's eyes unsettled him. Not greed, but weariness. A man who had seen too many promises turn to ash. Jonas spoke softly, his voice carrying conviction. "There's more of this," he said, holding the pouch like a secret, "not far from here. Beneath a banyan tree by the river bend. I've seen it with my own eyes." Men muttered in disbelief. Women clutched their children closer. Tariq said nothing, but the thought rooted itself in his mind like a seed too stubborn to die. That night, sleep refused him. He lay beside Safa, listening to the dry breath of the wind outside, the groan of the wooden roof. He saw his children in his mind, hollow-eyed skin stretched thin over hunger. He saw their future, if he stayed, endless days of waiting for mercy that never came. And then he saw the gold, not as treasure, but as an answer. A cruel, shimmering answer. By dawn, he had decided. He met Jonas at the edge of the village, where the banyan's shadow touched the cracked earth. They carried nothing more than shovels, picks, and a single lantern that burned too weakly to hold back the dark. Astewoptiona spoke of gold like a lover, unpredictable, dangerous, but worth every wound. He said the earth hid her riches beneath layers of fear, that only those willing to bleed could claim her secrets. Tariq didn't believe in secrets. He believed in hunger, and hunger is a god that demands sacrifice. They reached the spot as night thickened. The banyan loomed above them, roots twisting like old scars, branches heavy with silence. Jonas struck the ground first. The first clang of metal against stone echoed through the valley like a heartbeat. Tariq joined him. Each strike was a prayer, not for wealth, but for escape, for something that would make the suffering worth remembering. Oh, ors, pas. Sweat mixed with dust, turning their skin to clay. Then Jonas froze. Something shimmered faintly in the dirt. A flicker, a whisper of light. He brushed it with his thumb. Gold dust, fine, pure, trembling in the lantern's glow. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Tariq laughed, a broken, breathless sound. Half joy, half disbelief. The gold felt warm, almost alive, like it had been waiting. When Tariq returned home, dawn was only a pale line behind the mountains. Safa sat by the doorway, her eyes red from sleepless worry. He opened his hand. There, on his palm, lay a single golden flake, small, insignificant, yet brighter than anything they had ever owned. She stared at it, then at him. Her face didn't show pride, only fear. "Where did you find it?" she whispered. He looked past her, toward the hills, and said nothing. She took the gold, studied it under the weak light, and placed it quietly on the floor. "The earth gives," she said, her voice trembling, "but only to those who ask with clean hands." Tariq wanted to answer, but the words tangled in his throat. Behind him, the horizon began to glow. The first sunlight of the day touched the valley, and for the first time in years, it felt cold. The next days blurred into fever. Jonas returned with more tools, more men. They dug deeper, wider, faster. The valley that once prayed now pulsed with the sound of metal on stone. The people began to change. Eyes once filled with hope now shimmered with hunger of another kind. Safa watched her husband leave before dawn each day, his skin coated in dust, his voice reduced to whispers. At night, he dreamt of the mine. But the dreams were not golden. They were black and heavy, full of whispers that sounded like breath against his ear. "Deeper," they said. "Closer. Beneath your feet." He would wake, drenched in sweat, heart pounding like a pick against stone. A week later, Jonas called him to the edge of the dig. The shaft had widened, a wound in the earth that groaned with each descent. They had found more gold, small veins running through the rock, glittering like veins of light. It should have felt like triumph. But the deeper they went, the darker the air became, thick, heavy, and strange. Sometimes the men would pause, listening to faint noises below, like the sound of breathing. They laughed it off, but their laughter was forced. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Tariq lingered near the shaft. The wind had stopped. Even the insects were silent. He knelt, placing his hand on the earth. The soil was warm, too warm. Something pulsed beneath it. He pulled his hand back, heart racing, but told no one. Instead, he dug harder that night, as if the gold would explain the unease clawing at his chest. The next morning, Safa found gold dust on his pillow. It clung to his skin like pollen, shimmering faintly, even in shadow. She tried to wipe it away, but it wouldn't come off. That night, she sat beside him as he slept, watching his chest rise and fall. Each breath seemed slower, heavier, as though the earth itself was pressing down on him. "When dawn came," she whispered a prayer, not for wealth, but for mercy, because she had begun to understand something her husband had not. The gold beneath their feet was never meant to be found. The days that followed blurred into one long shimmer of gold and dust. The valley no longer breathed in rhythm with the wind or the sun. It pulsed in time with the mine. Every strike of the shovel echoed through Karuma like a heartbeat, steady, consuming, alive. Men who once prayed for rain now prayed for deeper veins. Children learned the sound of metal long before they learned to spell their names. And the women, they began to count their days not by sunrise, but by the return of men with hands stained yellow. The village that once sang with harvest songs now whispered of fortune and fever. Tariq rose before dawn each day, his mind already in the pit before his feet reached it. He moved like a man chasing something invisible, not wealth, but a feeling, the same trembling rush he'd felt the first night when the gold revealed itself to him. Each morning he told himself it was for his children. Each night, when he couldn't sleep, he told himself it was for survival. But somewhere between those hours, another voice had begun to speak, not in words, but in rhythm, in the pulse of his veins, in the silence between hammer strikes, in the shimmer that lingered behind his eyelids when he blinked. The gold had learned his name. Jonas, once cautious and methodical, had changed too. He worked longer, talked less. He no longer smiled at the men or warned them to rest. Sometimes Tariq would find him staring into the mine's darkness, lips moving soundlessly, eyes unfocused, as if he was listening to something that lived below. When Tariq asked what he heard, Jonas simply said, "The earth is talking back." He laughed afterward, but the laughter had no joy. Then came the first accident. A young miner, barely 17, slipped in the shaft when the rope snapped. The men climbed down after him, but all they found was his pickaxe wedged in the mud and his helmet floating in still water. They said the boy must have drowned, but there was no water at that depth. The elders begged them to stop. They spoke of the earth's anger, of the signs ignored, of the curse reawakened. But the men only nodded politely and returned to digging. Because once gold touches your skin, reason begins to slip away. At home, Safa watched the transformation with quiet terror. Her husband's eyes were no longer his own. They carried a strange reflection, as if lit from within. He barely spoke, barely ate. Sometimes he would sit outside all night, staring toward the mine, whispering numbers under his breath. When she asked what he was counting, he said it was shadows. She stopped asking after that. One evening, a storm rolled across the horizon. The miners refused to stop, even as the sky turned black and the rain began to fall in sheets. Lightning flashed, illuminating faces streaked with mud and greed. The ground trembled beneath their feet, a small quake, enough to send dust cascading from the tunnel walls. Jonas shouted for everyone to move back, but Tariq didn't hear him. He was deeper inside, digging alone. The walls seemed to whisper as he struck them. Each swing of the pick brought not stone, but sound, low, humming, like a distant song. The rhythm grew louder, matching his heartbeat. He struck harder, faster, until the wall cracked and a burst of gold dust filled the air like smoke. He fell to his knees, choking, but smiling. It wasn't dust, it was light. He thought he saw faces in it, moving, smiling, calling him deeper. Then the ceiling cracked. A sound like thunder ripped through the earth. Tariq barely made it out before the tunnel collapsed behind him. When he stumbled into the open air, rain pelting his face, the others stared at him in horror. He was covered head to toe in gold dust, his skin glowing faintly in the lightning flashes. Jonas grabbed his shoulders and shouted, "What did you do?" But Tariq didn't answer. He only stared back at the mine, where the ground still trembled softly, as if something was waking beneath. The next morning, half the workers left. They said the earth had spoken clearly enough. But Tariq and Jonas stayed. They convinced themselves that the collapse had uncovered something vast, something the others were too afraid to reach. At night, Jonas unrolled his map, a crude sketch of tunnels and guesses. He traced a finger across the deepest shaft. "There," he whispered. "That's where it is. The mother vein." Tariq nodded, but his mind wasn't on the gold anymore. It was on the sound, that hum that had followed him home. He could still hear it in the quiet, faint and steady, like a pulse buried beneath the world. Days passed. The fever spread. Those who left the mine couldn't sleep. Those who stayed behind began to fight among themselves. A man accused another of stealing a nugget. The next morning, one of them was found near the river, drowned, eyes open, mouth full of sand. The elders demanded the mine be sealed. Jonas refused. And Tariq Tariq couldn't bring himself to care. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw gold veins pulsing beneath the soil, like roots of some ancient heart. He began to dig alone again, long after the others had gone home. He didn't even bring a lamp anymore. The dark had stopped frightening him. Then one night, he saw Jonas again at the mine's mouth. The prospector stood motionless, staring into the pit. In his hands, he held a small piece of gold, rough, unshaped, but glowing faintly even in moonlight. "I found it," Jonas said without turning. His voice was calm, almost gently. "I found where it begins." Tariq stepped closer. "Then we share it," he said. "As we promised." Jonas didn't move. He whispered, "No, it's not meant for two." The wind fell silent. In that stillness, Tariq's heart began to pound. Slow, heavy, deliberate. For a moment, he saw his reflection in Jonas's eyes. Hollow, feverish, unrecognizable. He thought he saw the same madness staring back. And then, without words, they both understood what would happen next. The pickaxe came down between them like lightning. Metal met, metal! Sparks flew. Shouts echoed into the tunnel. The ground shuddered. No one saw what happened first. Who struck whom? Only the aftermath. A scream swallowed by dust, a body falling into the dark. And Tariq, crawling out of the collapsing shaft, hands bleeding, clutching something against his chest. The nugget, the one Jonas had found. It was warm, almost pulsing. He pressed it to his chest and felt a heartbeat that wasn't his own. When he returned home, Safa saw the blood and ran to him. He dropped the gold on the floor between them. He throbbed once, twice, then stilled, catching the dim lantern light. Safa stared at it, then at him. Her voice trembled. "What did you do?" He wanted to speak, to explain, to tell her that Jonas had fallen, that it wasn't his fault, but the words stuck. His throat felt dry, full of dust and guilt. Finally, he whispered, "It's over." But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie, because deep inside, he still heard that hum. Soft, constant, patient. And somewhere in the darkness of his mind, a second heartbeat answered. That night, Tariq dreamt he was standing at the mouth of the mine again. The earth was breathing. The gold glowed like veins under skin, and Jonas's voice echoed faintly from below. "Not meant for two," it said. Not meant for any. When he woke, the sound was still there. Faint, but real. He pressed his ear to the floor and thought he could hear it through the ground. The earth was alive, and now it knew his name. The rains arrived early that year. The river that once whispered now roared, swollen, furious, alive. 4 weeks, the miners stayed in their shacks, listening to the sky bleed. Thunder cracked over the mountains like the sound of something ancient breaking free. Luca sat by the open doorway of his hut, staring at the map, the same mud-stained paper that once led him toward hope. Now, it mocked him. Every line felt false, every marking a lie. He had circled the valley 100 times, dug until his fingers split open, but the gold refused to show itself. It was as if the earth had swallowed its promise whole. He hadn't spoken to Giro in 3 days. They still lived within shouting distance, but silence had become their language. Sometimes Luca saw him standing in the fog, motionless, watching the hills like a ghost, guarding something. Other times, Joro's lantern flickered at night, not near the camp, but deep among the trees, where no one should be. Luca wondered what he was digging for, or who he was trying to bury. Then came the night when everything began to unravel. The storm was worse than ever. Winds tore through the valley, snapping branches, bending trees to the ground. Luca's hut shook under the weight of the rain, and through the cracks, he saw flashes of light. Not lightning, but steady, pulsing glows. Lanterns, moving through the jungle. He recognized the pattern. Joro, but there were others with him, shadows trailing behind, their lights weaving in and out like silent hunters. Luca felt his chest tighten. He grabbed his coat and stumbled into the storm. The rain hit his face like stones, the mud swallowing his feet. He followed the distant glow, weaving between trees and vines, heart pounding against his ribs. When he reached the clearing, he saw them. 3 men, strangers, standing over an open pit, and beside them Joro holding something small in his hands. A vial. A strange, greenish shimmer inside it. Mercury, maybe, or something worse. The strangers whispered fast, angry words. Joro shook his head. They grabbed him by the collar. One pushed him toward the pit. Lucas' instinct took over. He shouted Joro's name. The men turned. In the flash of lightning, Lucas saw their faces, worn, desperate, drenched in greed. Not miners, gravediggers of fortune. The kind who came after hearing rumors of hidden gold. Joro's eyes met his, terrified, pleading. He opened his mouth to speak, but one of the strangers struck him. Luca lunged forward. Someone fired a shot. The sound cracked the night. When Luca woke, dawn was breaking, cold and gray. The rain had stopped, and the forest was silent again. He was lying beside the pit. Oro was gone. Only the vial remained, half buried in the mud, glinting faintly in the weak light to picate it up. It felt warm, alive. Inside, the shimmering metal swirled like smoke trapped in a bottle. And then, for just a second, Luca saw his reflection, but it wasn't his face. It was Joro's. Mouth open, eyes hollow. He dropped the vial. It rolled toward the edge of the pit and fell in, landing with a dull clink against something solid. Luca leaned closer and froze. Inside the pit, beneath the loose soil, gold, veins of it, running through black stone like threads of fire. His breath caught. He'd found it. The gold, the thing he'd dreamed of, bled for, gone mad chasing. But Joro, he looked around. There were no footprints, no bodies. Just silence. He tried to climb down, but the soil was soft, the edges crumbling. He slid halfway before stopping himself on a rock, and then he saw it. A hand, pale, still, half buried under the gold. Fingers clutching the same vial. Lucas's throat closed. He knew that hand Joro hadn't left. He'd been here all along, under the very treasure they had chased together, buried by the thing they'd both believed would save them. The air grew heavy. The smell of wet metal, earth, and death filled his lungs. Luca backed away, his mind spinning. The gold seemed to shimmer brighter now, as if it had been waiting for him to see it. Each piece reflected his face in warped, broken fragments. In every reflection, Joro's lifeless eyes stared back. He stumbled out of the pit and fell to his knees. The world tilted, his vision darkening at the edges. He pressed his hands into the mud, gasping, and when he looked down, his fingers were streaked with gold dust, the same color as Joro's blood. He tried to wipe it off, but it clung to his skin, shining even under the gray light. The more he rubbed, the brighter it became, until his hands looked dipped in molten fire. He screamed, but the forest swallowed the sound. Something inside him cracked. The lines between what was real and what was imagined began to blur. He could still hear Joro's voice, soft, broken, whispering from somewhere deep below. "You took it, didn't you?" He staggered to his feet, shaking his head. No, he hadn't taken anything. He hadn't even touched the gold. But the ground beneath him felt alive, pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat. He ran. Through the trees, through the mist, back toward the river. His lungs burned. His vision flickered. Every step seemed to echo that same whisper. "You took it. You took it." When he finally reached the riverbank, he collapsed, plunging his hands into the water. The gold dust refused to wash away. Instead, the river shimmered, streaks of gold bleeding from his skin into the current. He watched it drift downstream, glowing faintly like dying embers. And for the first time, he understood. The gold wasn't his to find. It wasn't meant to be unearthed. It had taken Joro. And now, it was taking him. The sky turned pale as morning rose. The valley looked the same. Quiet, almost peaceful, but something in it had shifted. The forest felt like it was watching him. Every rustle, every drip of rain carried the echo of that whisper. Lucas stood, trembling, and looked back, toward the jungle. In the distance, the pit still glowed faintly under the fog. Gold, untouched, waiting. He thought of Joro, of their dream, of the madness that followed. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the guilt and grief, a small, dangerous thought began to grow. What if he could still have it? What if the curse wasn't real? Only guilt playing tricks? What if gold was simply gold? He turned toward the trees again, his heartbeat steadying. The forest seemed to hold its breath, and then Luca began to walk back, slowly, deliberately, toward the pit where it all began.